Okay, so last week, a football legend, Diego Maradona, died, and as expected, there was an outpouring of grief from especially from the Bengali and the Kerala section of my various timelines, and various other football mad enthusiasts on my timelines as well. And there were lots of tributes. There was lot of distraught fans, lots of recounting of personal anecdotes. A lucky few talked about the time they got to see Maradona play. Of course, this is the older bunch. A few of them talked about how some of his matches, some of his life inspired them. And clearly, it was like a hugely affecting moment for millions of people around the world. And not so much for me because I'm not really into the whole sports scene. And I just it well I mean it, obviously you feel bad when someone passes on, but beyond that you get a sense that something big has happened, but it didn't really mean too much to me. But what it did do is it kind of brought the whole fan story to life for me, right? And it reminded me of, well, here you go, a fact you don't need to know, but this is really interesting. When you talk about fandom, I have somebody here with me who's going to talk a lot about some really amazing sort of moments of fandom, or perhaps. But I think the fact that I was reminded of. So I don't know if a lot of you have seen the movie Ben-Hur. It's one of those old classics, and one of the key scenes in Ben-Hur is built around a chariot race. And of course, the actual shoot of this, by the way, is a whole sort of fact story in and of itself, because people died, somebody was killed, horses died, and this was well before the days of PETA or animal rights activists, and no animals were harmed in the making of this movie. So a lot of animals and a lot of people were harmed in the making of that movie. So chariot racing, and the thing is, chariot racing historically was really big in ancient Rome, right? So they had something called obviously the Circus Maximus, and the Circus Maximus was so called because it was a circus, as in a round space around which the chariots would race. There was also in Constantinople, which became the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, there was something called the Hippodrome. Hippo means horse, or hippus is horse, and Rome is the place where they run, coming from dromon, right? Run. So a place where horses run is a hippodrome. Anyway, so you had the hippodrome, and you'd have these insane chariot races where people, where literally horses and charioteers died because it was so intense. And what happened is, in the days of the Roman Republic, 4 factions built up: the greens, the blues, the reds, and the whites. All right. And each one of these 4 factions actually supported a particular team of chariot racers, and each one had their own sort of favorites. And over the centuries, and this is a sport that lasted actually essentially mostly unchanged for perhaps close to 1,000 years. So probably longer lasting than I think any other sport that exists today, including the sport that we're going to come to, football. And what happened is, the one big change that happened over the course of the centuries is that from 4 teams of green, blues, reds, and whites, or 4 factions, it came down to 2, right? Greens and blues. So I think the blues absorbed the reds and the greens absorbed the whites, or maybe the greens absorbed the reds. The point being, it came down to greens and blues. And at the time of the Eastern Roman Empire, with its headquarters at Constantinople, it was pretty much, these were the 2 factions that sort of divided the city. And when I say divided the city, it wasn't just a sporting rivalry, it was a political rivalry, it was a social rivalry, because the greens were the faction of the noblemen, and the greens were the faction of the commoners, and the blues were the faction of the noblemen. So there was all of this, right? So there was a huge sort of a split down the middle, and it would descend into the most unbelievable violence. All right, so there was this one point in which the Greens ambushed the Blues in the Hippodrome, and they killed 3,000 of them. So that's not a riot, that's a massacre. But the absolute end moment of chariot racing came about actually because of the fandoms, and it was something called the Nika riots. This was during the reign of one of the Eastern Roman Empire's greatest emperors, the Emperor Justinian. And he was actually on course to reconquer a lot of what the Roman Empire as a whole had lost. And obviously, when you're fighting wars, you need money, and he raised a lot of taxes. To cut a long story short, during one of the races, both the Greens and the Blues started shouting Nika, 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 which basically means victory, victory, victory. And usually you chant it at your preferred sort of racer. But here they were chanting Nika in a way that was very clearly suggesting that they wanted victory over the emperor, or their race was more important than the emperor. So it was a sort of challenge. And Justinian was so disturbed that he considered fleeing the city, until his wife, who really deserves a story of her own, an absolutely amazing woman, his wife and his general Belisarius, the two of them said, look, you can't run away from the city because of this, you've got to teach these guys a lesson. So what they did is they locked the Greens and Blues into the Hippodrome, and Belisarius sent in the army, and they butchered 30,000 fans in one day. So they just locked the gates, brought in the army at one end, and just started cutting and chopping till they reached the other end, basically. And they had basically cut through 30,000 people. And that was the end of the Greens, that was the end of the Blues, and that was the end of horse chariot racing in the Roman Empire, or the Eastern Roman Empire, what was left of it. And really that's a really big reason why this sport actually ended. It actually stopped over there because nobody wanted to bring this madness back. And so, but all this sort of story about Maradona and all the reactions and sort of brought to mind the essence of the sort of fandom. And I'm reminded of the fact, obviously, that the word fan is actually a shortening of the word fanatic. And it's something that from a sports perspective, I really haven't been able to understand. And the outpouring with Maradona made me sort of want to question and want to speak to somebody and understand why it is like this and what goes through people's heads, and how do you start down a journey that maybe, who knows, one day will end up with 30,000 people locked in a stadium and murdered because this brings to mind actually the El Salvador-Honduras football war. So El Salvador and Honduras, by the way, and I'm segueing to football here, El Salvador and Honduras were having border problems anyway. Seems familiar, I know. And one team's was playing in the other team's home stadium, and apparently somebody mistreated one of the footballers, or there was some sort of riot. It was a pretext. Next thing you know, there were riots. Next thing you know, the two countries were locked in a war. And obviously there were Cold War sort of support on either side. One side was the US, one side was the USSR. And everybody was keen to give the other side a go. But it all started, that war started with a game of football. So I don't get it. I genuinely don't get it. But I have somebody here who perhaps will be able to give us, or give me at least, an insight into why this happened and what really drives this kind of fandom. So I have Varun with me here. Varun is, for those of you who know me, Varun is my brother. He's also a huge fan, and I'm going to kind of Varun, I'd like you to first, if you'd like to talk a little bit about whom you're a fan of. It's football, I know. Which team you're a fan of, and why, and where did it just start? I just want to know, like, how. Okay, who are you a fan of first? Which team?
Hi, this sounds awfully close to my first ever interview. I was asked the same question actually, but so I support a football club called Arsenal. It's a part of the English Premier League. I don't really support an international nation as such. I used to support the French at one point of time, which kind of goes hand in glove with the fact that I support Arsenal. And when I started supporting Arsenal.
Wait, Arsenal is a UK club, right?
Yeah. well, up until almost the early 2000s, it was plain and clear that it was a UK club. Maybe between 2000 and 2010, you wouldn't be too far if you thought it was a French club with the amount of French players that we had in it.
We, huh?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay. See, that's what I don't get. Okay. So this we, all right. And we worked with plenty of people who have weed Man United, who have weed Chelsea, who have weed Liverpool, and I want to get into this journey. Okay, so how did you start? Like, where did this whole thing of being a fan of Arsenal start?
So I think we were, at least a lot of the friends that I hung out with at that point in time were into football. We kind of played football ourselves, but outside of that, um, football was first telecast in India, I think 2001, on Star Sports, and the year preceding that, which was the season of 99 2000. No, sorry, 2000 2001. Manchester United had actually won the title, and Arsenal had finished second. I think in that there are lots of these cues as to why you end up saying we. That was cue number one. Arsenal weren't the winners, and as a default of that, when it did come to India and people had to choose sides, these weren't sides that we grew up with in these cities. These maybe we knew a few players, and which is why we perhaps supported a club. But if you didn't know a player, there was often this was the reason, whether it was the previous champion, the reigning champions, or the second team, or the color of the jersey was nice, or you knew a player, right? One of the four sort of reasons.
Sorry, I'm just going to interrupt over here, but that kind of seems to me also what happened with F1. Now that you're mentioning it, I think for the longest time, like I've got friends who have been like McLaren fans now for like, I don't know, 20 years.
Yeah.
All right, but I'm pretty sure that most of these hardcore fans, at least at the time when they started out, when we were this is 20 years ago, whenever F1 first came to India.
20 years for you.
So I'm pretty sure none of them, either owned a Ferrari or a McLaren, or had sat in one, or had some sort of brand loyalty story over there or whatever. But I think at that point it was Schumacher and
It was either individuals or Hakkinen.
Yeah, or Hakkinen, there you
it
go.
was either individuals, or it was the color of the car, or it was the brand that people knew of.
yeah.
Everybody knew of at least a Ferrari and a McLaren, or a few others like that. But it was there was a value at the end of the day that you got drawn to, or a series of values that you got drawn to. And I think that's, at least for us, who these sports have never been in our blood, so to speak. Unlike cricket, it wasn't something that you were born around or consuming immediately. There needed to be some values that you associated with, for which you picked up supporting a club, because Lord knows we all invested a whole lot more into each of these journeys, right?
What are the Arsenal's values?
There's so many. I think I really only knew Arsenal for me was about Arsene Wenger, who only quit 2
Is he
years ago.
related?
No.
I know you.
But funny story that he's only ever played or coached a team in red and white all through his career.
Yeah, who before Arsenal?
Whoa. So he came from a Japanese club called Nagoya. Hope I got that right. And then before that, he coached Monaco and Nancy, AS Nancy in France. He used to play for a much smaller team.
AS Nancy, I mean, just doesn't sound like. Hi, who do you play? I play for
Hey
Nancy.
man, it's the French.
Okay.
Yeah, so for me the values that were inherent to Arsenal at that point in time were probably inherent to Arsene Wenger, and they led with just like togetherness. As simple as that word sounds, it was centered. The fulcrum of it was all around how do you bond seamlessly together to be the best working team at large. It still required flair. It still required skill. You had to have the audacity to put that show on. You had to have a positive mindset. It wasn't about bringing out the flashy big name signings.
Are you projecting your like Man U, I don't know what you want to call it, but or Chelsea rather. Aren't your big rivals Chelsea?
Back in the day when I started supporting, there was only really Arsenal and United.
It was. And so this whole thing of flashy signings. So isn't it kind of like Barca and Real Madrid, where one is sort of the working man's.
I don't know if Barcelona and Real Madrid is as much of the working man's.
Real Madrid is like the big signing, big checks, big.
So if you look back at it, and it's very similar to your story about how the chariot teams came about, right? Historically, at least my understanding is it's come largely from 4 buckets, right? One bucket has been either political and that's where Real Madrid and Barcelona come from, because Real Madrid has been something that's been right from the team that the monarchists in Spain supported, went down to General Franco's time, still is deeply intertwined into Spanish politics and
the conservative side.
And you look at Barcelona on the side, it's highly about, they're waving the Catalonian flag, right, in a sense, and there's a whole different.
So you can't be a liberal and support Real Madrid. I am saying Madrid, Real Madrid.
I am, but again, I don't have as much to sort of gain or lose as perhaps the locals or the Spanish locals have. For me, it was more. I don't know if I connected with one team's values, and then the rest of them were all about the football or players or whatever else. Because there's a whole load of investment that goes into it. So political is one, geographical is the other. So like when you look at the Merseyside derby in Liverpool, for instance, you look at Everton and Liverpool, they're both out of the same team. I've heard stories about how people
both out of the same city.
Really?
Everton's from Liverpool?
Yeah.
I didn't know.
And the blue and the red, right? Or Manchester for that matter, when you have United and City. But
also the blue and the red.
Yeah. And so if you look back at Liverpool, I've heard stories about how people, what team they support by the color of the dustbins, because you either see a blue dustbin or a red dustbin outside the house. It's the longest sort of playing English rivalry at the top division is the Liverpool-Everton rivalry. It's not the harshest, but yeah. And then again, you had religious related formation of teams. So
Rangers and Celtic also.
Celtic and the Rangers in Scotland. It's essentially Catholicism versus Protestants, right?
Yeah.
And it's been there. And then you've got this fourth sort of bucket of where teams got formed, which was from people who like businesses or workers who came together as part of under an institution, and you see that still the reminiscent of it is it's still on today. You have Red Bull, who owns teams in the US, in Germany, in Austria, and stuff like that. So those are generally the 4 buckets that I've seen with the biggest themes or rivalries come out of. Obviously, the last one is geographic. So when Arsenal actually got, they came out of a team called Dial Square because of the Woolwich workers who worked in an Arsenal.
Like the Arsenal.
The Arsenal. Right. And then they were actually based out of Kent, southeast London. And in around 1931, they moved to North London, and that's when the rivalry with Arsenal and Tottenham actually started. And it only started because they were geographically in the same, based out of the same part of North London. So those generally tend to be historically the 4 buckets of why teams garnered support, or there was like this local.
So if I had to have a really reductionist take on this, all right, it's a form of tribalism. Basically, it's a form of sort of drawing a line and saying this is mine for whatever reason. Like, does it feel like a rationalization? Like a post facto rationalization, like now I like Ferrari red, or I like Michael Schumacher, or I like blonde players, I don't know, and then I sort of dive deeper into the mythos and the story and etc., and I come up with all these rationalizations for why these guys are my guys, all right, and which is what's interesting, it goes from the player. So you might like, I know you started liking some player in Arsenal, and then that affection or what
I like the
loyalty-
fact that they were second first.
Huh.
Then I started falling in love with Bergkamp.
Bergkamp. Bergkamp.
And
I
that's
remember.
Then,
Yeah.
but it had to be beyond Bergkamp for me to stick around with the club. And if you follow, for any of those who follow football, you will agree with me that it has to be more than an ex-player to keep you going with the kind of run of form that Arsenal have had over the last couple of years at least. It's been disastrous. So to still stick in there means that you've got to have a deeper sort of affiliation with the club to some level. But coming to your point, fanatics or fans or fandom is an extreme word. It is most times when used or when understood comes from a place of negativity, right? There was this definition that I had read from The Adoring Audience by Lisa Lewis. It's a book about audiences in 1992. She says fandom is often stigmatized as abnormal, dangerous or silly. It's referred to as something that you're sick with because you're obsessive about it. You're sick about the fact that that's something that plagues you. It's all negative words, right? And what's fascinating for me is the fact that you've seen how this negative word is actually used against us to actually hook, line,
But
sinker.
that's the thing. I don't
Hook us
think
into
like now it's
Still
it's
happens.
looked at. So, yeah, it is. But I don't know if right now fandom is really looked at. And you can see this in nerd culture as well, all right? So Star Wars fandom, or Lord of the Rings fandom, or whatever. Where like, so that's where my fandom would come from, all right?
Yeah, but there are different there are different layers of that, right?
No, when you talk
So
about
you
things
have
like
the absolute-
values, when you talk, so you
The guys
so
who are ingrained,
toxic fandom.
sure, and that's
That is
dialogue,
where-
but the
that is
characteristics
where-
are still the same.
Correct. No, so you know what? Here's the thing. I want to actually like pivot to something connected to this, but I just want to say over here. I think clearly fandom is now a spectrum, and like anything else, sort of accelerated by the net and social media and anything, where you can be a positive fan, or you can be like a totally toxic. And going back to the original sort of connotation of fanatic, which is some madman who was always willing to
Obsessed.
sort of like and actually cause harm for something that is an abstract principle. He's not winning the match.
Sure. No,
Right.
and so I'm not deviating from too much that you said, and I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I'm just saying that there is that subsection that we actually look to, refer to, understand what they're actually feeling and why. Why are these compulsions there? Why are they
Correct.
feeling the way that they are? And then we dial all of that down, of course, right? But we understand that those are inherent characteristics as humans we tend to have, albeit in these guys it's super exaggerated. But if you dial them down, they're all relevant to you and me as well, whether it was to you for Star Wars or for me for football, right? So you're using it as subject matter, as your research fodder, to be able to still understand how we all react to things like this. So that's what marketing does. And what we are referring to is perhaps the 1, 9 and 90. It's the same principle. The 1 is probably
Madmen,
one end
yeah.
of spectrum. 9 is the guys who you are actually targeting, who will be your short influencers of if they get the word out there, then the masses really follow. And as sport has moved away from being geographically centered or politically centered, right, it's evolved into the professional fan, it's evolved into the global fan, which is why each of these clubs that I spoke about, each of their values, and some of these clubs have maybe not had to move away from them too much. Some of them have had to work on them
To
slightly,
internationalize their
yeah,
values.
to make them more globally relevant, right? So that fandom now is no longer restricted to just North London clubs that people based in and around North London to support that club.
So I just want to ask over here, right? So we're talking about values, and we're talking about history, and we're talking about how this is sort of getting internationalized. And I want to kind of draw this back to an Indian example. Okay, what is it going to take to see this kind of fanaticism? Do you think we have this kind of fanaticism in IPL?
In IPL, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a little stat that I came across, by the way. Last year, as of last year, the ISL garners more eyeballs
Hmm.
than the EPL in India.
Seriously,
I didn't know that. I mean,
I
I
didn't
also
know
came
that.
back.
Yeah.
It comes with the EPL plus the World Cup put together. ISL had more viewership than both of those.
That's pretty interesting, man.
That
That's
is,
really
it
interesting.
blew my mind.
Yeah, but I think it's also, so what's happening over here is there is almost like a transference of aspiration. All right, so I'm also looking at this kind of aspirational value. All right, so the idea that I have some connection to a Ferrari or a Manchester United, I saw David Beckham's haircut. Okay, maybe that's where it started.
Badge value.
Yeah, it's badge value. And then I'm sunk into then the values of the club and so on and so forth. Then the idea that something like this is available so close to home, which is probably what the deal is with ISL, right? And then transference of some of that here, because it is aspirational now, and to be fair, it is aspirational to kind of be a football fan right now, and it has been for a while. But also people are kind of actually seeing this, and now we're seeing an actual organic fandom growing for these clubs in India. Now, I'm talking about outside of Kerala, Goa, and West Bengal, which have traditionally been the football strongholds in India. So, having said that, all right, I know the holy grail for brands is how do we turn that light of fandom onto ourselves, and turn that into money. But I suspect that'll be a kind of conversation for an entirely different kind of podcast.
For sure.
But I think lots has been written about how marketers are just looking for sort of fans to, and I want to talk about over here the role of social media and conversations that people are having, okay, about brands, and how easily that can turn into, so when you talk about 1990, all right, the 1% will never change, the 9% may or may not, the 90% will be swayed, so you have to aim at the 9%. And do you recall any club or team or whatever you want to call it, where there has been a wholesale shift away, like a big negative take, whether it's in EPL or wherever in a sports,
That they shifted away from a negative
yeah.
trait?
So I'll give you one example, okay? Or they shifted, they said, oh my god, no, not this club or not this. So I'll give you one example. Big controversy in Star Wars, all right? The new trilogy that came out, okay? And I'm talking about Star Wars fandom is at least as fanatical as any sports fandom,
Sure.
right? The big thing that happened was episode 8, which is the one Rian Johnson, the second last penultimate episode, everyone was really mad because he brought a lot of focus on what the 1% thought were like not really the important characters, okay, and he turned it into everyone said, oh, this is social justice, and this is service to left-wing causes or whatever, where just because a person is of a certain ethnicity or a certain gender or whatever they're getting, and so there was this huge migration away, and there was a giant reaction to the point where Disney actually had to bring J.J. Abrams back for the last part and do a major course correction, all right. And I'm not getting into the right or wrong on this, but do you have any interesting sort of takes from sport where like fan reactions so strongly influenced where a club was going? Maybe it was a negative reaction, maybe a club really had to kind of
so
eat
many,
its-
and especially nowadays, it's. Let me just put it this way: the average life expectancy of a manager was in. I don't have the stats on this, but I'm pretty confident when I say this. Was at least 2.5 times, 3 times, if not more, than it is right now in the Premiership, and that's only largely down to fan opinion. It's a running joke in the football circuit that the decisions or the teams are actually going to be selected on social media in the next few years, because everybody has their opinion, and every fan now suddenly is super educated because stats, analytics, game plan, strategies, they're all available everywhere. So like sometimes you have to pinch yourself to just to remind yourself that, hey, there's a reason that the manager is actually sitting there and not you.
The Man U guy, right? Got into big trouble after Alex Ferguson. Is he still around?
No.
Jose Mourinho?
There have been
Or
several people after
several
Alex
people,
Ferguson,
okay.
and it's just not agreed with them much. Like what's
Big shoes to fill, no?
It's there. I mean, hey, it's a couple of decades that you're of one man rule that have been taking place. Similar with Arsenal, right? Both those clubs were run top end.
Arsene Wenger's out.
Yes.
He's not there. Who's
No.
there?
So we had Wenger, and that's one of the stories that I was going to tell you, is that in my mind, for me, the board and him were one, and there was no. If you took the fans out of the equation, the board would have given Wenger a job till he wanted. The fans changed it. The fans put so much pressure
to get Wenger out
at games, through
I didn't
whatever
know, really,
forums.
the fans
The
wanted
last 2
Wenger
years of it was the worst time I've ever witnessed as a fan base, as an Arsenal
they
fan
got
base.
bored of losing.
Well, I'd just like to add that with Wenger, we never, except for the last
we didn't
year,
get used to.
we never got out of the Champions League, and now we've realized that it was, like he said it once, it's a title in itself to just qualify for the Champions League. We haven't done so since he left, and we don't look anywhere close to being able to do it. And the same applies for like most of these clubs that had these, and for at least United in that matter, that they didn't manage to. They had David Moyes, they had Van Gaal, they had so many managers who came in and walked, and like Mourinho, who, for instance, who it didn't work, and it's so tough to find the reason that it didn't work. And sometimes you just, it's the burden of the legacy that the previous person has left behind that has made a difference.
So, given the kind of power that fans wield, okay, could you say there's a corollary or a sort of a reverse kind of thing, that the club has as much power over the fans as well, in a sense, right? It's kind of now almost reached a democratic equilibrium where both sides are kind of. And the reason why I'm saying this now is actually I'm doing now a very hard pivot and talking about sports and politics. Okay, do you think that politics has a place in sports? And I'll tell you. Let me give you one example.
Inadvertently does.
No, let me give you an example. And I don't mean politics in the sense of politics between the manager and the boss and all that shit.
Country.
I'm talking about like politics, right? I'll give you one movement which has caught my eye. For example, is the whole football against racism story, which the football UEFA, not association. Who's the FA? There you go. And there, in a nutshell, is really the difference between my level of fandom and Varun's. But right, so they run this huge campaign, right, and this whole thing about against racism. I've seen some pretty beautiful videos.
And Black Lives Matter.
There you go. Colin Kaepernick, and so that's
every game in the EPL starts with everybody going and taking a knee till late.
Yeah. So does that have a space in sports? One is social justice, all right. Given that, especially when we're talking about racial tensions, sports has been one place where subjugated or oppressed populations, races, individuals, whatever, have had an outlet. If you look at the preponderance of black athletes in the US, for example, they've had an outlet to succeed. All right, whereas perhaps in other areas they don't. At the same time, a lot of people now, for example, that Rathod, the shooter, the ex-army guy, right? When he won a medal, he made some sort of comment about how it was easier shooting at the Olympics than it was at the border or something like that. And there was a big outcry about politics and sports and how the two should never meet. And so here's my opinion, right? Sports are an indelible part of society. Society includes all of these other issues as well, right? I don't understand this idea that apparently this is some holy grail where political compulsions, and when I say political, I don't mean just political parties, I mean social compulsions, justice compulsions, whatever, all of these things should not find a voice. All right. Just the other day, I read an article in The Guardian where an English writer was writing about how, why aren't Pakistani players playing in the IPL, right? I'm not getting into the right or wrong. I'm just saying, so that's there. What's your take on that? And what role would fandom have to play in that? Do you think that, for example, fandoms can be sort of leveraged to political gain, for example?
Of course they can. There's so many questions that you asked there. I don't know if you realize if you asked those many questions, but
is that kind of a podcast, man? It just goes like from...
Look, at the heart of it, you must understand that sport has magic in it. It is there to have the various ups and the downs. It is there to excite. It is there to find those unbelievable moments that will happen. Yes, they come out of practice. Yes, they come out of hard work and perseverance and all of those things. But all of those things happen, and they all happen within a set amount of time. So you might actually be the better team, but if you don't play that at that level for those specific minutes, the other team who could actually end up winning. And that's the beautiful part of sport, right? No matter what sport that you watch, there is the possibility of the underdog actually winning. And I think from there is the fundamental premise of the fact that every person has a chance to express their creativity, their thoughts, their opinion, their style, their flair, their reservedness, all of those things on the pitch, right? That becomes their canvas. So I look at it as art. So the question is then, does art have a space for political a political voice?
I would say art is politics.
Sure.
In a sense.
And I think the question here really is not whether one is allowing for politics to take place on a field or not, but it's about who is allowing for those politics to take place on the field or not. I'll put it into context. If a player, an artist in this case, wants to make a statement, I'm fully for it. But if it is coming from an institution that is backed by a government, and it's more outside in that sense, that's making a statement, then that's something that I would be against.
Outside in meaning?
Means if the BCCI, I'll just give you an example, who's made up now perhaps of a couple of players, yes, but I'm talking about a couple of years ago now, when they were run by politicians, and the politicians were making a sporting opinion or putting a sporting opinion on the table, trying to morph it or guise it under the blanket of sport. That is what I have a problem with. But
you mean if they had a political opinion?
Yeah.
Which they were putting under
But
sport.
if like a player had wanted to stand for, whether it was Black Lives Matter or it was a genocide that happened in his country or whatever else, that's expression. That's his place. That's his canvas. That's the one place that he has control, where he is truly proficient in that space to make an opinion. He's got millions of people, or they've got millions of people who have joined to watch them perform their art by ways of the skill on the football or the skill as a collective. And so then if they've been able to garner that attendance or that viewership, then of course they should have a chance to be able to be owning that audience and what they say to that audience.
Okay, so I'm with you, because what I'm getting is, if we are going to have politics in sports, or if we are going to have non-sporting conversations using the medium of sports, it's okay if it's punching up and not punching down. When individual players,
correct,
or teams are making big statements against large issues or institutional issues or organizational issues, right, versus like the organization kind of manipulating, I get it. And so what this does is, and that puts me in mind for my final little story, that and it's a beautiful story which perhaps really captures something about why fans believe the way they do and what they believe in, and the kind of beautiful stories that can come out of sports. gives fans something to believe in beyond just the color of the jersey or the whatever the name of the player or in 1942 the Germans had captured large swathes of the Soviet Union and including Ukraine and Kiev, and the Germans were keen to prove their racial superiority over the locals, and they had one of the flak units of the German army actually create a football team, the unit football team, and they challenged a Kiev city team which was called Start, which represented the city's bread factory. Okay, so there were workers in the bread factory. The thing is, a lot of the workers used to play before the war for Dynamo Kiev and for Lokomotiv Kiev. And so when they challenged, so it almost became the oppressors versus the oppressed on a football field. And in all of this, I mean, there was obviously a lot of propaganda around it. There was a lot of stories, but there was a lot of hope also around it. And Start, which is the Soviet team, actually won 5-3. And so it became a great sort of legend. It became a moment of joy. It became a moment. It was a political moment, but it was also a great sporting moment. And if I remember correctly, it was made into a film, right? I think it was called Escape to Victory. Have you seen Escape for Victory? Michael Caine, Sylvester Stallone. So they changed the story, obviously, where it was like prisoners of war challenged by the Germans, and they make their escape at the end of the match. They win and they right. So obviously Hollywood took it and turned it into a Hollywood turd, basically. But it's an amazing story, all right. And there are great moments, and somehow I've just felt that, like so many other areas of endeavor, right, of human endeavor and excitement and involvement, etc., and culture generally, if the idea of fandom was the idea of these sort of moments of belief, moments of uplifting each other, creating hope and spreading that hope, I mean, I get it. And I completely see what all that fandom is about and what that feeling is about. And I feel that a lot of the people who were sort of mourning the loss of Maradona, I get what you're saying, because that's really, they saw something that they could believe in themselves.
Irrespective of the fact of all the bad things he did.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or the silly things.
We're all human, no?
Exactly.
We're all human.
And in the case of Maradona, for instance, I read this really interesting line. If there was no Diego, you would have had no Maradona. There were two split people.
Right.
If you didn't have the eccentric Diego, you wouldn't have the uber talented, confident, eccentric flair that you saw when Maradona on the pitch.
Yeah. So I guess fandom is about seeing perhaps the best part of what we hope we can be.
Yeah.
Up on the big screen, in the lights, in the color that we like. And I think if we can just kind of keep the toxicity out of it and people can kind of focus on that side of fandom, which I think the vast majority
and
do.
the Venus.
Exactly.
The fact that
the
you
feeling
can...
of belonging.
The fact that you can belong without having ever seen people, met people, but you all identify with one or more principles and values is the one amazing thing about fandom, because you could you could be completely different people.
Yeah.
But because you have just these small set of values or principles that are surrounding your team that are the same, it binds you like very little can.
Nice. Okay, so I think that's a good place to kind of wrap this, and it was great having you on the show, Varun. This was a good conversation,
really
and
enjoyed being here. Thank you.
I hope there's been a couple of not need to know kind of facts, but I hope also it's been an interesting conversation.
That's why you got me, because you were like, this can be no risk, right? Because if somebody has a problem with it, hey, they were not supposed to know about it in any case. So it's brilliant.
All right, guys, good one.
Ciao.